My daughter-in-law yelled. "Why is that old leech here? We don't have space." The words, sharp and venomous, sliced through the cheerful chatter of the dinner party. They were not whispered. They were projected, a declaration for all of their friends to hear. I was standing by the kitchen doorway, a platter of roasted vegetables in my hands, the heat warming the ceramic but doing nothing to stop the ice forming in my veins. For a moment the world seemed to tilt, the sounds of laughter and clinking glasses warping into a distant metallic drone. I saw my son, William, sitting at the head of the table, his face a mask of strained pleasantry. He flinched, a barely perceptible tightening of his jaw, but he said nothing. Not a word in my defense. He just picked up his wine glass and took a slow, deliberate sip, his eyes fixed on a point somewhere over his wife's shoulder. That silence was louder and more painful than Kimberly's screeching insult. It was a confirmation, an endorsement. In that moment I understood I was not family. I was an inconvenience. A leech. It had been 5 years since I lost my Raymond. 39 years we'd had together. A lifetime packed into a small sturdy house in a quiet part of Boston. That house was more than just brick and mortar. It was a living museum of our love. Every scuff on the hardwood floor was a memory of our children running through the halls. Every nail in the wall had once held a school portrait or a finger painting. The garden in the back was Raymond's pride. A riot of roses and hydrangeas that he tended with a gentle, calloused hand. After he was gone, the silence in that house became a physical presence. It was a heavy blanket that smothered me day and night. The memories that once brought comfort now felt like ghosts, their whispers echoing in the empty rooms. I was 62 and profoundly, terrifyingly alone. William had been my rock during that initial period of grief. He called every day, brought groceries, sat with me for hours while I cried. It was he who first planted the seed. "Mom, this house is too big for you," he'd said one evening, his voice thick with a concern that I now recognized as something else entirely. "You shouldn't be alone. It's not safe. Come live with us. With me and Kimberly. We have plenty of room. We can take care of you." It sounded like a lifeline. The idea of living with my only son, of hearing the sounds of a family around me again, was a balm to my aching soul. He was so persuasive, so seemingly full of love. He painted a picture of a golden years idol, me in a comfortable room, helping with the grandchildren he and Kimberly planned to have, being part of a bustling, happy home. The catch, of course, was the house. "Sell the house, Mom. It's a huge asset just sitting there. You can use the money to enjoy your retirement, travel, and help us out a little. It'll be our family nest egg." I see now how masterfully he played on my loneliness and my maternal instinct to provide. I sold the house, the repository of my entire adult life, and handed over a significant portion of the proceeds to William. He called it an investment in the family. He and Kimberly used it as a down payment on a much larger, more ostentatious house in a wealthier suburb, the very house where I was now being called a parasite. The first few months were a carefully constructed illusion. Kimberly was cloyingly sweet, calling me Mom, and asking for my recipes. I had a small bedroom at the back of the house, overlooking a pristine lawn I was not expected to touch. I contributed to the bills, bought groceries, and paid for small renovations, all from the dwindling funds of my home's sale. I told myself this was what it meant to be part of their family. I was contributing. I was useful. The facade, however, began to crack and peel away with alarming speed. The sweet requests for my pot roast recipe turned into demands for nightly 3-course meals. "Mom, could you just whip something up?" became my daily call to unpaid servitude. Soon I was not just the cook, but the maid, the laundress, and the gardener for the small decorative flower beds Kimberly insisted upon but refused to tend. My days were a blur of chores, my hands raw from cleaning chemicals, my back aching from scrubbing floors that were never clean enough. Kimberly's compliments soured into critiques. My cooking was too old-fashioned, my cleaning not thorough enough, my very presence an irritation. She spoke to me as if I were a slow-witted, slightly deaf employee. "Rose," she'd say, exaggerating her enunciation, "I need you to remember to separate the darks from the lights. It's not that complicated." I tried to talk to William to explain how I was feeling. I cornered him in his home office one evening, my heart hammering against my ribs. "William," I began, my voice trembling slightly, I feel like I feel like Kimberly isn't very happy with me here. He didn't even look up from his laptop. Mom, Kimberly is just stressed. This big house, her job. It's a lot of pressure. She's just a bit high-strung. Don't take it personally. Just try to stay out of her way, stay out of her way. I was living in a house I had paid for, performing the duties of a full-time domestic servant, and my own son was telling me to make myself smaller, to become invisible, to appease the woman who was systematically erasing me. I retreated, the unspoken words turning to ash in my mouth. I had nowhere else to go. My old life was sold and spent. I was trapped. The dinner party was the culmination of a year of escalating humiliations. Kimberly had been planning it for weeks, a showcase for her husband's new promotion. I had been tasked with all the preparation. For 3 days I cooked, baked, and cleaned until my bones ached with a weariness so deep it felt like it was settling into my marrow. I made Raymond's favorite beef brisket, a recipe that always felt like a sacred ritual, and Kimberly had sneered at it. So Brown Rose, can't you make something a little more modern? I had polished every piece of silver, ironed every linen napkin, and arranged the flowers just so. As the guests arrived, a parade of sleek, laughing people in expensive clothes, I was shunted into the kitchen, told to bring out the appetizers and then make myself scarce. I was the caterer, the hired help, a ghost in the machine of their perfect life. And then came the moment. I had brought out the last platter and was lingering in the doorway, my heart foolishly hoping for a kind word, a nod of acknowledgement. A guest, a woman with sharp bird-like features, had asked William, "Is that your mother?" "She looks lovely." Before William could answer, Kimberly's voice, high and brittle with irritation, rang out. "Why is that old leech here? We don't have space." The silence that followed was thick and suffocating. I saw the guests exchange quick, uncomfortable glances. I saw the pity in the bird-like woman's eyes. Most of all, I saw William's averted gaze, his hand clutching his wine glass as if it were a shield. He let the insult hang in the air, unanswered, unrefuted. He let them all believe it. That his mother, the woman who raised him, who sold her home for him, was a leech. I turned without a word, the heavy platter suddenly feeling weightless in my numb hands. I walked back into the pristine, silent kitchen, placed the vegetables on the counter, and moved as if in a dream toward the back of the house. Each step was a deliberate, heavy motion. I closed the door to my small room and leaned against it, my body shaking with a silent, racking tremor. There were no tears. The shock was too profound, a glacial coldness that had frozen my grief before it could melt into sorrow. The word leech echoed in the hollow space inside my chest. A creature that latches on, that drains the life from its host. It was how she saw me. It was how my son, through his silence, allowed me to be seen. I looked around the room, the single bed, the small dresser, the one window looking out onto a manicured lawn I wasn't allowed to walk on. This was not a home. It was a cage, and I was an unwanted animal within it. The days that followed were a gray, featureless landscape of despair. I moved through the house like a phantom, speaking only when spoken to, my voice a dry rustle of leaves. I did the chores mechanically, my mind a blank slate. The humiliation had hollowed me out, leaving nothing but a dull, throbbing ache. Kimberly, emboldened by her public victory and William's passivity, became even more brazen in her cruelty. She would leave passive-aggressive notes for me. "The floor needs to be mopped again," or "try to use less salt." She spoke about me in the third person while I was in the same room. "William, we need to tell her not to use my expensive laundry detergent on her old clothes." I was no longer a person. I was an object, a problem to be managed. William remained a silent, complicit partner in my degradation. He avoided my eyes, offered me weak, meaningless smiles, and continued to live his life as if nothing was wrong. I spent my evenings in my room, the television on but the sound turned low, its flickering light a poor substitute for company. I would stare at the screen for hours, not really watching, just letting the images wash over me. It was during one of these bleak, empty evenings that the shift happened. I had been flipping through the channels apathetic, when I landed on a daytime talk show. A woman about my age, with tired eyes and a story that was a mirror of my own, was speaking to the host. She spoke of moving in with her daughter, of selling her home, of being treated like an unpaid servant, of being called a burden. Every word she said resonated with a painful, shocking clarity. Then the host asked her, What was the turning point? What made you decide to take your life back? The woman on the screen looked directly into the camera, and it felt as if she were looking straight into my soul. She said, "One day I realized they had taken my house, they had taken my money, but I was the only one who could let them take my spirit. I had spent my whole life taking care of others. I decided it was finally time to take care of myself. My story wasn't over. I just needed to start writing the next chapter myself." Something inside me snapped. It was not a loud, violent break, but a quiet, definitive click, like a lock finding its key. The fog of despair that had shrouded my mind for so long began to dissipate, burned away by a sudden, intense flame of anger. It was a cold, clean anger, not the hot, messy rage of a tantrum, but the focused, clarifying anger of absolute certainty. A leech. They thought I was a leech. I had poured the very foundations of my life into their comfort, and they called me a parasite. The woman on the television was right. My story was not over. It was not going to end in this small, airless room, fading into invisibility. I had been a wife, a mother, a caregiver. I had been Raymond's Rose. It was time to be Rose again for myself. That night, for the first time in over a year, I did not sleep. I sat in the dark, the television off, and I began to plan. The anger was a fuel, burning bright and steady, illuminating the path forward. First, I needed to know what I had left. For months, I had been handing over cash to Kimberly for groceries or bills, never asking for receipts, never checking my own balance, too ashamed and intimidated to question their handling of my money. My investment had become their slush fund. In the pre-dawn hours, I crept out to the living room where my old tablet, a relic I barely used, was stored in a drawer. I blew the dust off it, plugged it in, and waited with a pounding heart for it to charge. My hands trembled as I logged into my bank account for the first time in what felt like an eternity. I braced myself for the worst, expecting it all to be gone. But as the numbers loaded on the screen, a wave of dizzying relief washed over me. It was less than it should have been, far less. I could see a steady drain of large unexplained withdrawals and transfers to William's account. But there was still a substantial amount left. Enough. It was more than enough. It was my escape. It was my future. Seeing that figure, that tangible proof of my own resources, was like taking my first breath of fresh air after being submerged for too long. It was real. It was mine. My strategy began to form. A silent, secret war waged from my tiny bedroom. I became an actress, playing the role of the defeated old woman they expected me to be. I became quieter, more withdrawn, my face a carefully composed mask of weary resignation. I did my chores without complaint. I nodded meekly at Kimberly's criticisms. I made myself as small and unobtrusive as possible. They mistook my focused silence for submission. They thought they had finally broken me. In reality, I had never been stronger. I was observing them, studying their routines, their comings and goings. Every night, after they were asleep, I would be on my tablet, my new weapon and my only confidant. I became an expert on the Boston real estate market. I devoured listings for small one-bedroom condos in quiet, walkable neighborhoods. I learned about closing costs, property taxes, and condo fees. I researched moving companies and furniture stores. I built my new life in the secret, silent hours of the night, pixel by pixel, dollar by dollar. Each listing I saved, each calculation I made was a brick in the foundation of my freedom. I felt a thrill I hadn't felt in years, a sense of purpose and agency that was intoxicating. I was no longer a victim waiting for a rescue that would never come. I was engineering my own salvation. The most difficult part was the secrecy. I lived in a state of constant low-grade terror of being discovered. I cleared my browser history obsessively. I kept my tablet hidden under my mattress. When a real estate agent I'd contacted online called my phone, I had to pretend it was a wrong number, my heart hammering as Kimberly eyed me with suspicion from across the kitchen. "Who was that?" she'd asked, her voice sharp. "Just a telemarketer," I'd mumbled, my hands shaking as I put the phone away. It was a close call, a reminder of how precarious my plan was. I learned to be more careful, communicating only through email and scheduling calls for times I knew I would be alone in the house. I arranged my first viewing on a Wednesday morning when I knew William would be at work, and Kimberly had a yoga class followed by lunch with her friends. I told them I was going to the pharmacy to pick up a prescription. The lie felt slick and unnatural in my mouth, but it was a necessary tool. Walking out of that house alone, with a secret destination and a hidden purpose, felt like a monumental act of rebellion. The real estate agent, a kind woman named Sarah, met me outside a lovely brick building in Brookline. The condo was on the second floor, small but bright, with large windows that looked out over a tree-lined street. As I stepped inside, something shifted within me. The air was still and smelled faintly of fresh paint. Sunlight streamed through the living room window, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. It was quiet, a peaceful, promising quiet. I walked through the small space, running my hand along the cool granite of the kitchen counter, imagining my own teapot sitting on the stove. I pictured a comfortable armchair by the window, a stack of books on the sill. In the bedroom, I saw my own quilt, the one I had made with Raymond years ago, spread across the bed. It was not a palace. It was not the grand family home I had sold, but it was a space that could be mine. A sanctuary. A place where I would not be a leech but a resident. A queen in my own small castle. It's perfect, I whispered, the words catching in my throat. Sarah smiled warmly. It has a good feeling, doesn't it? It had more than a good feeling. It had the feeling of hope. I made an offer that day, using a burner email address I had created for this specific purpose. The next 2 weeks were a blur of anxious waiting and clandestine communication. I would sneak out to the library to use their computers to sign digital documents, telling William and Kimberly I was joining a senior book club. They had laughed at the idea. You? In a book club? Kimberly had snorted. What on earth would you have to talk about? Their condescension no longer stung. It was merely background noise, the buzzing of insects outside the window of my new life. During this time, their demands escalated, as if sensing some shift in the household dynamics they could not name. They decided they wanted to renovate their master bathroom, and approached me for money. "Mom," William said, adopting his most sincere, concerned tone, the one that had convinced me to sell my house. "We're a little short for this project. If you could just help us out, think of it as another investment in the property. A year ago, I would have handed over the money without a second thought, eager for any scrap of approval. Now I looked at him, at his handsome, earnest face, and I felt a profound, chilling disappointment. I saw the greed behind the performance. "I'm sorry, William," I said, my voice quiet but firm, a tone I had not used with him in years. "There's not much left. My savings are running very low." Kimberly, who was listening from the doorway, scoffed. "What do you mean, running low? What could you possibly be spending it on?" The accusation was clear. I was holding out on them. I simply looked at her and said nothing. My silence was a wall she could not breach. Her frustration was palpable. She saw me not as a person with her own needs, but as a resource that was proving to be finite. Their annoyance with me grew, their comments becoming more pointed, their demands more insistent. It was all fuel for my fire. I counted the days until my closing date like a prisoner marking time on a cell wall. The day I went to sign the final papers was overcast and gray, but to me it felt like the brightest day of my life. I had told my son and his wife that I had a doctor's appointment across town, a checkup that would take all afternoon. The lie came easily now. It was a key unlocking the door to my freedom. I sat in a sterile, anonymous office and signed my name over and over again, each stroke of the pen a declaration of independence. When the lawyer slid a small, shiny set of keys across the table toward me, I had to choke back a sob. I closed my hand around them, the metal cool and solid against my palm. They were the heaviest, most beautiful things I had ever held. They were the keys to my own life. I didn't go straight back. I couldn't. I drove to my new condo, my heart a frantic drum against my ribs. I let myself in and stood in the empty living room, the keys still clutched in my hand. The silence was absolute. It was not the lonely silence of my old house after Raymond died, nor the oppressive, judgmental silence of my son's home. It was a peaceful, welcoming silence. It was the sound of possibility. I walked to the window and looked down at the street. People were walking their dogs, children were riding their bikes. It was a world I could join, not just observe from a back room. I stayed there for an hour, just breathing in the air of my own home, before I forced myself to leave and return to the battlefield for one last confrontation. When I got back, they were waiting for me in the living room. their faces set in twin masks of irritation. "Where have you been?" Kimberly demanded. "Your doctor's appointment was hours ago. Dinner isn't going to make itself." I looked at her, at the entitled anger etched on her face, and I felt nothing but a distant, clinical pity. I did not raise my voice. I did not engage with her anger. I simply stood in the entryway, my purse clutched in my hand, and looked from her to my son. "I'm not making dinner tonight, Kimberly," I said, my voice perfectly calm and even. I was delayed because I was buying a house. The silence that descended on the room was more profound than the one at the dinner party. It was a silence born of pure, unadulterated shock. William's mouth literally fell open. Kimberly's face went through a rapid series of emotions: confusion, disbelief, and finally sputtering rage. "You what?" she shrieked, her voice cracking. "You bought a house? With what money?" "Our money." "No, Kimberly," I replied, the calmness in my voice making her even more furious. "With my money. The money from the sale of my house. The home my husband and I built over 40 years. You can't do that," William finally managed to say, finding his voice. He looked utterly bewildered, as if the world had suddenly turned upside down. "Mom, we had a plan. You were going to live here with us. We were going to take care of you." The hypocrisy of his words was so staggering it was almost laughable. "Take care of me?" I asked, and for the first time, a tremor of the hurt I had buried for so long entered my voice. "Is that what you call this, William? Allowing your wife to call me a leech in front of your friends? Treating me like your unpaid servant? Forgetting I even exist unless you need something?" I looked directly at him, and for the first time he could not meet my gaze. He looked down at the floor, the picture of shame. Kimberly, however, had no shame. "You ungrateful old woman!" she screamed, her face contorted with fury. "After everything we've done for you, we gave you a place to live. You gave me a room in exchange for my life savings and my dignity," I said, my voice dropping low. "I have bought back my dignity. My new home has space for it. I am moving my things out tomorrow." And with that I turned and walked to my room, closing the door softly behind me. I could hear her screaming continue for some time, a torrent of abuse and threats, but it sounded very far away. It could no longer touch me. I packed my few personal belongings, my clothes, my photographs of Raymond, the quilt from our bed. The rest of the furniture in the room which I had bought I left behind. A final silent gift. The next morning I was up before them. A small moving van, which I had arranged weeks ago, was waiting at the curb. I moved with a quiet efficiency, carrying my boxes out to the two young men who loaded them onto the truck. William and Kimberly eventually emerged, looking disheveled and aghast. They stood on the porch watching me, their faces a mixture of anger and confusion. As I carried my last box, the one with Raymond's pictures, past them, William reached out a hand. "Mom, wait. Don't do this. We can talk about it." I stopped and looked at my son. I saw the little boy he once was, the young man I had been so proud of. And I saw the weak, cowardly stranger he had become. "There's nothing left to talk about, William," I said, my voice gentle but final. "You made your choice a long time ago, every single day that you chose your silence over my dignity. I'm making my choice now." I walked to the moving van without looking back, got into the passenger seat, and we drove away. I did not watch their house, their life, recede in the mirror. I looked forward at the road ahead. My new life began that day. The first week in my condo was a revelation. The sheer, unadulterated joy of making my own coffee in the morning, of sitting by the window and reading a book in complete silence, was overwhelming. I unpacked my memories, placing Raymond's picture on my nightstand. I spread our quilt on my bed. I filled the small space with the essence of the life we had built, a life I was now reclaiming for myself. The silence was my friend, a comforting presence. For the first time in years I felt not just safe but free. I joined a gardening club at the local community center. I started taking long walks. I introduced myself to my neighbors. I slowly, carefully began to rebuild a life that was entirely my own. About 6 months later there was a knock on my door. I was not expecting anyone. I opened it to find William standing on my doorstep. He looked terrible. He was thinner, with dark circles under his eyes, and his expensive suit looked rumpled and sad. He was alone. "Mom," he said, his voice hesitant. I did not invite him in immediately. I simply stood there waiting. Can I talk to you for a minute? He asked. I stepped aside and let him enter my small, sunny living room. He looked around, taking in the cozy space, the pictures, the sense of peace that permeated the air. He told me what I had already suspected would happen. After I left, the financial and domestic structure of their life collapsed. Without my money to supplement their extravagant lifestyle, they quickly fell into debt. Without me to cook and clean and absorb Kimberly's endless vitriol, the full force of her toxic nature was turned on him. The beautiful house became a battleground. The fights were constant, vicious. She blamed him for my leaving, for the loss of her free labor and her personal bank. He finally saw her for what she was, a cruel, grasping, and deeply unhappy woman. He had left her. The divorce was messy and expensive. He had lost the house, most of his savings, and all of his illusions. He stood in the middle of my living room, a broken man. I was so wrong, Mom, he whispered, his eyes filling with tears. I was a coward. I let you. I am so sorry. The apology was years too late, but it was sincere. I could see that. He asked the question I knew was coming, the one that hung in the air between us. I have nowhere to go. Could I maybe stay here? Just for a little while? Until I get back on my feet. The old me, the martyr mom, would have thrown her arms around him, would have said yes without a moment's hesitation, ready to sacrifice my newfound peace for his comfort. But I was not that woman anymore. I looked at my son, my only child, and I felt a surge of love, but it was now tempered with wisdom and a healthy dose of self-preservation. You can stay in the guest room, William, I said, my voice calm and measured. But this is my home. There are rules. You will contribute to the bills. You will do your own laundry and clean up after yourself. And it is temporary. This is not your home. It is my sanctuary. You are a guest here until you find your own place, he nodded, his face awash with relief and shame. Yes, Mom. Of course. Anything, he understood. The dynamic had changed forever. I was no longer the provider, the servant, the leech. I was the matriarch in my own home on my own terms. My story was far from over. I was finally the one holding the pen. Now, I often think about what a difference a single moment of clarity can make. It can transform a life from a tragedy of quiet desperation into a story of resilience and rebirth. It's a lesson that cost me dearly, but one I wouldn't trade for anything. My peace is hard-won and I guard it fiercely. William is still with me for now. He is trying. He is rebuilding his life, and in some ways we are rebuilding our relationship, but on a foundation of respect I never had before. Sometimes I catch him looking at me with a kind of awe, as if he's seeing me for the first time. In a way he is. We are all strangers until we are forced to reintroduce ourselves. What would you have done in my place? Would you have found the strength to walk away and build a new life from the ashes of the old one? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I love hearing from all of you, and it truly warms my heart to know where my stories are being heard. Please take a moment to write me where you are listening from today. Your support means the world to me, and allows me to keep sharing these experiences with all of you. If you enjoyed this story and would like to support the channel, please consider hitting the like button and subscribing. For those who are able and wish to do more, the Super Thanks feature is a wonderful way to help us continue bringing you new content. There are many other stories waiting for you. With heartfelt greetings. Until next time.